Welcome to In All Honesty, the podcast where we get real about life and all the problems that come with it. I'm Michelle Elman, and I'm that friend who we all know is a little bit too honest. You might not come to me when you get back together with your ex, but I'll be there for you when it all goes tits up. Welcome back to In All Honesty, and today we are teaching you how to feel your feelings. We always get told how to feel your feelings, but we never get taught how that actually works. So first up, your feelings are in your body and your thoughts are in your brain. And if you are overthinking something, it's usually because you are underfeeling. Usually you are avoiding feeling something within your body, and therefore your brain is going in overdrive so that you can stay away from those emotions and feelings. Emotions and feelings are words I'm going to be using interchangeably throughout this episode, but it was one of the most life-changing things I learned how to do, and I learned this when I was 21 years old, and it's actually a large reason why I became a life coach and not a psychologist, because a lot of the talk therapy is what I call very cerebral. It's very head-focused. It's very thoughts-focused. Whereas I found the most life-changing work I've done in my own life personally is very feelings-based, is very emotions-based. And I talk about this process a lot, but I actually realized that a podcast is the perfect way to actually demonstrate it. If you want to see me walk through any of this visually, we are on YouTube, but even just having the voice, I can show you so much better. So that's what we're going to do. I'm literally going to walk you through it. So it might be a very different podcast episode for you, but hopefully one you can refer back to. And we're going to start with breathing. So the first thing I just did was uncross my legs, because actually for you to be grounded, you want to have your feet on the floor. I'm wearing shoes right now, but ideally you'd be barefoot. Sit upright in the chair and just breathe. So if you breathe in for 4, hold it for 4 and out for 4. So we're going to do it together. So as you're breathing, I want you to do a body scan. So you start at the top of your head and you just bring your awareness to your hair, and then bring your awareness to your forehead. Bring your awareness to the inside of your head, maybe your mouth, down your throat. How's your throat feeling? How's your heart feeling? How's your stomach feeling? And just breathing over and over again until you can feel every part of your body. And then I want you to ask yourself, if there's a part of your body that's aching, is there a part of your body that has a lot of heat? Maybe a lot of tension? As I'm doing a body scan right now, I am noticing that there is a lot of tightness in my stomach. I have just come out of hospital, so that is likely what it is. But if I were to describe it, and this is where we want to get into the details, it's tense, it is hot, it is pulsing, and I really want you to start noticing, and you don't have to describe it, but I just want you to pay attention to that pain point. And that is where your emotions are likely sitting. So you can ask yourself a number of things. You can ask yourself, what is this emotion trying to tell me? What is this emotion? And then you go through the main 5 emotions. So is this sadness? Is this fear? Is this anger? Is this guilt? Is this shame? If that gets too complicated and you go down a long conversation in your route, then leave it alone. We only want simple answers. If something's coming through and saying yes immediately or no immediately, that's information. If you start going to overthinking, start thinking about it deeply and going like, oh, well, is it fear or is it anger? Or how do I know? Just leave it alone. Like, we're not at that point yet. We have to remember that I have got to this point doing this for over 10 years. So I am very experienced at doing it now. I can sit for 3 to 4 hours doing this kind of somatic processing. But when I started, I could only do 5 minutes. And so anytime you find yourself in your head, I just want you to return back to your body, return back to the breath. If that's all you can do is just breathe. So let's say focus on that pain point within you. Mine is the one in my stomach, but you might want to put your hand on it. So let's say it's your throat. Let's say it's your legs. Put your hand there and just picture yourself breathing into your hand. And then as you breathe out, I want you to picture the breath leaving that pain point. Some people view this in different ways, and this whole episode is going to be me giving you options. So it could be you breathing in and seeing a certain color, and then breathing out another color. So I like to imagine breathing in a bright white light into that pain point, and then breathing out a thick, black, cold, charry smoke, and watching that leave my body. And if it's my stomach, for example, I'll visualize that black smoke coming from my stomach up through my throat and out through my mouth. And that can be helpful to some people. To others, it could be actually changing the shape. So what shape is the pain point? Is it a blurry blob? Is it a tight fist? What would happen if you loosened that fist? What would happen if you blurred the edges? What would happen if you made it bigger? What would happen if it made it smaller? What we're focusing on is anything that provides relief. We want the sensation to get better. But when you put your focus on something, the tendency is it will tend to hurt more before it is relieved. And that is what is actually called feeling your feelings. And that is why people avoid it, because when you put your attention on it, the pain can temporarily get worse. But if you stay with it, as you can see in this video, but also for those just listening in audio, my hand is currently on my stomach and staying there. As you stay with it, you should hit a point where you feel relief. And that is the goal. This is what we're trying to do. And if you can only do it for 5 minutes and you don't get to the point of relief, that is absolutely fine. We all have to start somewhere. Another place I started was with guided meditations, because trying to avoid the distraction of the mind or going into overthinking, when you have a guided meditation, you can follow along with the words someone is telling you. I use ones on Audible. I use one for inner child meditation by someone called Glenn Harold. And that might be your easiest first step. But again, if all you can do is return to the breath, this is also what people call mindfulness, is just finding 5 minutes to breathe, be present in your body, notice what feels uncomfortable, notice what feels in pain. There are also other questions you can ask yourself. So if you don't want to go through the 5 emotions and you find that's overcomplicating things, or that it's making you very cerebral and going into your head, you can ask yourself questions like, what am I avoiding right now? What part of my body do I not want to feel? And then putting more breath into that area. And again, putting your hand on the point that you're breathing into. Another question you can ask yourself is, what does this feeling remind me of? And some words might come into your head. You don't need to analyze it. Just pay attention, be curious about it, be open-minded about it. Don't judge yourself. The moment you judge yourself around it, you'll shut down, because you can't process any emotion if the overriding emotion is you judging it. When you judge it, you cover it in shame. And so therefore you're then trying to process the shame around the anger or the shame around the sadness, but you're not actually able to access the anger or the sadness or whatever's actually was the original emotion. So asking yourself, what does this part of my body need to hear right now? It could be something like that you are loved, that I'm paying attention, that I'm listening to you. And I understand it's a very foreign process, especially if you've done a lot of talk therapy and it's very cerebral, to then let those thoughts go and not go down a path of analyzing. And also even the concept of talking to yourself like that. I mean, there are jokes within psychology. In different contexts, we always talk about having voices inside your head being schizophrenia, but actually we all have a voice inside our head. We all have an inner child within us. And normalizing actually having those conversations with yourself and feeling that part of your body and going what does this remind me of? What might surface is a specific age. So for example, let's say you are processing rejection around dating and you find that it's a tight ball in your chest and it really hurts. And when you breathe into it, it gets more painful. And just as I said that, you could hear the change in my voice, because even just talking about it triggered some sort of rejection from my own past. And then you ask yourself, what does this remind me of? And it could be something that surfaces I remember a time that one of my primary caregivers, like a mum or a dad, rejected me. It might be a specific memory. It could have been a time when you asked someone to play in the playground and they said no. What is currently happening in the present day is touching upon a past wound that was opened up. And it is my belief, and a lot of the beliefs within life coaching, that it touches upon that wound to present it as an opportunity to change the programming around it, because you now have more knowledge and information. So trying to relive the same situation essentially, or at least the same emotion, but with more tools so that you can end it in a better way than you were capable of, let's say, when you were 7 years old in a playground. So asking yourself what this reminds you of will also help understand things where you might have had a larger reaction than you thought you would, or you responded reactively rather than choosing your response. And there is a slightly problematic saying, but one that I continue to use because it's just a really helpful way to phrase it, of if it's hysterical, it's historical. Look, there are negative connotations around the word hysterical, but essentially what it means is if the reaction is larger than you thought it would, it's largely because it's touching upon a wound that comes from your past and is less so about the situation in front of you. And so as you're processing that and you're thinking about the memory, what you might find is, let's say this memory of you in a playground comes up, and it's this rejection of you asking your friends to play and them saying you're not allowed to come play. Going back into that memory as the adult self and speaking to that child. What did she need to hear? What do you now know as an adult? It could be you getting down to her level, getting on your knees and speaking to her eye to eye, giving her a hug maybe, or saying something like, your friends still love you, they care about you, they're being really unkind right now, and I know this hurts. You're validating that past version of yourself and actually feeling into that, and actually giving that child the comfort they should have had in the moment, and likely didn't because they didn't speak to anyone about the situation at the time. But you're able now to parent yourself and feel into it. Going back into that moment as you keep breathing into that feeling, you might notice that it moves around the body. So as it moves around the body, it could change shape, it could change heat. What you might notice is when you process emotions, that area of the body gets really hot, or it might get really tense. You might originally start with a sensation in your stomach, and then you find it comes to your throat. And when it comes to your throat, what you might want to do is yell and scream. This is why when you do this, you want to be alone. And I think yelling and screaming gets stigmatized a lot because you shouldn't yell and scream at a person. But yelling and screaming is a way to release energy from inside the body. If you're alone in your room, but you're not alone within the house and you're concerned about it, put a pillow over your head, scream in the shower so that no one can hear you. Go in your car and scream. Put some loud, angry music on so that when you scream, no one can hear it, or everyone's just listening to the music. Letting that come out of your voice. And when you're feeling a lot of these things, it's okay to cry. It's okay to feel however you want to feel. Another thing you might want to do, and the reason why I'm mentioning it is because I'm feeling it right now, is as you're breathing into your body, you might find you might want to shake out. So right now I'm noticing a fizzing in my legs. And oftentimes that's fear. And I don't know what that rejection memory brought up in my body, but you don't need to know. And this is where talking therapy is very different to somatic processing. Is like, oh, that's interesting. I have fear going down my legs right now. Let me shake it out. So like if you're watching the video version, you probably can't see my leg anyway, but I'm just shaking my leg out, letting that leave my body and continue breathing into it. It's not about solving any of these. It's about validating how you're feeling. It's about noticing how you're feeling, being curious about it, but we don't need to go into long, convoluted conversations about like, why is fear coming up? Why is fear coming up when I'm trying to process rejection? That doesn't even make sense. Like all of that's judgment. All of that's the chitter chatter you don't really need to pay attention to. Just return back to your body. Anytime you get lost in your brain, come back to your breath. And it might be helpful to count your breath. So to do the 4 counts in, 4 counts holding, 4 counts out. Some people find it more helpful to breathe out longer than breathing in. So you might want to make your out breath 8 and your in breath 4. This is a physical thing where you have your 2 nervous systems. One is your parasympathetic nervous system and one is your sympathetic nervous system. Your sympathetic nervous system is when you are stressed. It's for fight, flight, freeze response. Parasympathetic nervous system is when you're relaxed. So when you're relaxed, your breathing will be slower, will be calmer. And if your out breath is longer than your in breath, you are more likely to be in your relaxed nervous system. So when we slow our breath, it is a way to come back into our body and actually have an awareness around what we're feeling. And even if all you can do is just stay in that is enough. And that is the place you start. It's funny because as I'm talking, I'm also getting like fizzing in my hands now, but this is all energy moving. And if you don't know this stuff, sometimes you can get this, I call it pins and needles, but it's not really a pins and needles. It's fizzing and it's energy. And in life coaching, we called emotions energy in motion, because emotions, much like how we don't get taught emotions sit within the body, emotions are energy. And so that's why a lot of these sensations of me having to shake out, or me wanting to scream, or me wanting to cry, or you feeling any of these things, it's why all of these things are quite natural. And the reason why it's quite natural is if you watch any animal in the wild who is getting chased by another animal and is being attacked or fleeing for their life, what happens when they return to safety, and you can actually look this up on YouTube, is the animal will shake. So this is very naturally wired into our body, and it's why dancing is really good. One of the dancing classes I go to, which is all about releasing and feeling this energy, is called 5 Rhythms. You can find loads around the country. It's all about letting your body actually do the natural movements. So if you are, for example, processing this in bed late at night, you are doing a meditation and you get this natural urge to stretch your body, or to get up and shake, or to get up and actually dance and maybe move your hips about. Your hips trap a lot of trauma. Feel into that. Don't judge yourself for looking silly. Ideally, you're doing it in a room where you're not being judged by another person. And you can actually let that energy move through your body and come out and be released. So sinking into that feeling and letting it exist without all the judgment means that it can actually be processed. And that's what we talk about when we talk about processing emotions. It's going through the life cycle of an emotion. And if emotions are processed successfully, they are meant to be temporary. We aren't meant to hold on to these emotions for the rest of our lives. But because there are so many societal messages that stunt us actually being able to process the emotions of like, oh, you're too sensitive, this isn't a big deal, I don't even know why I'm upset about this, we've halted our chance to even process anything. And that's why we end up carrying around so much more of this than we need to. So this is all the basics, but I also want to get into more inner child stuff. But before that, our message of the week.
Hi, Michelle. I was hoping you could tell something about processing emotions or even situations. Sometimes I find my mind wandering to moments from years back where I wish I would have responded differently to someone. Most of these situations were moments where someone crossed or I didn't protect my own boundaries. When I get these flashbacks, I feel the same anger I felt back then and I get really worked up over them. Can you give me tips on how to process these moments and feelings in a healthy way? Lots of love, Emma.
Thank you so much for that message. So with anger, I've mentioned yelling and screaming, but there are also a number of things you can do that are, again, a way to release and process that emotion. Throwing ice at a wall is a really great one. It's my new favorite one. Punching a pillow. I have got one of these yoga bolsters. It's basically, it looks like a maternity pillow. And I love putting it between my legs and literally punching it like it's a person. Again, all of this sounds really aggressive. But the thing is, that whole thing about emotions is how you process it is healthy as long as you aren't hurting yourself or anyone else. But we have this illusion, especially around anger, that anger should be managed as opposed to anger should be processed. And we are physically, biologically meant to actually express emotions. And so whether it's hitting a squash ball, going to a kickboxing class, like all of these things are healthy. But the key is you're not actually going to process the emotion if you don't tap into the emotion. So you can go to a kickboxing class and you'll probably get really great endorphins after the class. But if you aren't actually tapping into the memory that's arising, you won't be relieving that anger specifically. So what you can also do is, because memories are coming up, there's a real desire where you want to go into that conversations, and you can spend ages, hours. I used to do it late at night, especially if I've not paused during the day, of regurgitating the conversation, replaying it, what I wish I had said. I wish I had done this, and then I could have done this, and what if I bump into that person again? How would I approach it? All of this stuff is not helpful. Like, it's brain chatter. Instead, what you want to do is go back into that moment in time. So let's say it's an argument you had with a partner. Let's say you're in the kitchen. Literally float into the room and be in the room. When you're in the room, I want you to see the version of you at the time. And then I want you to be able to pause the moment mid-argument and then take that younger you outside of the room and take her away from the situation. When you take her away from the situation, I want you to tell her everything you wish you had known at the time. Comfort her, validate what she's feeling, tell her she's allowed to be angry. This is where you learn how to have that compassionate inner voice. If you have a huge inner critic inside you, this isn't going to come natural at first. When I first did this, I had no clue what to say to comfort a person because I didn't know how to comfort myself. But also, I've never really had that role model. I went to a boarding school where like the comforting role models were not present. Therefore, I didn't really know how to talk like to a 15-year-old who needed comforting, and actually being able to say like, you're allowed to be angry about this situation. You shouldn't have been spoken to about this. Some people find it better to remove your inner child from the room and have that conversation. And when I say inner child, let's say this happened 10 years ago and you're 40 and now that was when you were 30. Same thing. It's take that 30-year-old outside of the room. Your 40-year-old knows better than your 30-year-old. Some people will find what needs to happen, especially in the case of anger, is like you stepping in front of that younger version of you. So you saying to the younger version of you, like, I've got this, I'm going to handle this for you. And then you saying to the other person, the person you're in a fight with, do not speak to her like that. That is completely unacceptable. And again, I know a lot of this sounds crazy, and I know there's a lot of judgment around this, around like what, so I'm meant to imagine a memory from my past and go into that memory and then try to change what happened. You're not trying to change what happened. You're trying to go back to a memory where you've not had any resolution, speaking to a version of yourself that you are probably already judging, and giving that past version of you the information you now have, the knowledge you now have from being older and wiser, and so you can let that memory go. And when that younger version of you feels like you've had boundaries set, either because you've taught her how to do it or because you've done that on her behalf, you're able to let that feeling go. And it's largely because in the moment you didn't have those tools, but also you were not able to walk away from that situation and process the anger because you didn't give yourself permission to. As I said, if we were teaching this in primary school and kids knew this from the get, this would be happening less and less. But the reason why these conversations are coming up more and more, one could be because of shame, because you have a level of shame or guilt around not acting a certain way at the time. But there's no point shaming yourself for not knowing something you didn't know at the time. Then there's guilt around like, well, I let someone treat me like that. All of these conversations, again, you can get trapped in it for ages. I know I've had a lot of nights till 2:00 in the morning where I'm just regurgitating conversations I cannot change. But what you can change is how it sits within your body. So that when you come back to one of these memories, what happens if you've processed the emotion around it is it now feels emotionally neutral. You know, when you think about something from your past and you're getting riled up again, but then there are other moments in your life, you think about memories and you're like, yeah, that was sad. If I think about a past boyfriend where I've processed that breakup, I'm like, yeah, it was sad. I mean, he didn't treat me great. There's not a lot of emotion around that. Now, if I think about something that is a lot more recent, I bumped into an ex-friend recently. Oh, I could go, like, you can see it, you can feel it in my body, you can hear, like, even the speed at which I talk, like, my body is going into sympathetic nervous system right now. And the more you pay attention to your body, and it's simply by bringing up a memory in my mind of me bumping into an ex-friend and me feeling my body right now is perceiving that as an attack, my voice has sped up, my breath has sped up, and all of that, once processed, is again returning back to the breath. So if you notice the difference between when I mentioned my ex-friend versus an ex-boyfriend, one is emotionally neutral and one is not. Obviously one has been processed and one is not. Clearly I need to process the one that happened recently. But you also saw the reaction within my body. And once you become aware of your emotions and you're able to pay attention to your emotions, you will start noticing when your body is getting into fight or flight or becoming what I call dysregulated. And the more awareness you have, the more you have a chance to process things after they've happened not 5 years later. And so the trick is being more aware and being more present in your body. This is what people talk about when they talk about mindfulness. I don't like using these concepts or these words where the words don't actually explain what you're trying to say. Mindfulness, what does it mean? Whereas like, actually, if I can teach you how to be present in your body, that's all it is. And if you're capable of sitting there and finding 5 minutes out of your day every day to prioritize that, then it saves time, because it means you're not getting into bed and the first time you've paused all day and then you're suddenly regurgitating all these conversations of like, oh, actually that moment did actually surface anger within me, or actually, oh, that moment did surface some sadness in me, or like, oh, I'm actually feeling a little bit more guilt around that than I thought. So all of that is to say, like, that's how you let those memories go. And also not having this stigma around talking to yourself inside your head. And hopefully that can provide some resolution. And again, it might be tapping into that memory and then punching a pillow, or tapping into that memory, throwing ice at a wall, and actually feeling that relief. One of the ways that I find is helpful to let go of emotions is to know how you would do things differently next time, so that you can feel proactive around it, because you can't change what happened, but you can change how you would deal with it in the future. I hope that answered your questions. Thank you so much for getting my new book, and good luck processing all your emotions. We end every episode with something you are learning at the moment. And something I am learning about at the moment is quite interesting. It's been quite fascinating, where sometimes you don't remember a date, but your body will. This was something a friend taught me earlier this week. I had a big milestone happen, not a very positive one, a very negative one happen this week. And I was trying to forget the date. And I was like, I don't need to remember this as an anniversary of something that painful happened. And then it felt like everything that day went wrong anyway. And so I was talking to my friend about it, and she was like, look, you might not remember the date in 10 years to come, but what I find is your body remembers the date. And there's so much more conversation around this now, especially with books like The Body Keeps the Score, around our memories are stored within our body, the same way our emotions are stored within our body. And therefore me giving myself a lot of grace around painful moments. And for you, this might be the anniversary of the death of a loved one, or the anniversary of a breakup, or the anniversary of you going into hospital. All of these things might surface in your body, and trying to refuse it to be the case didn't really work very well for me. So the thing I'm learning right now is leaning into that, accepting that as much as I want to be over this milestone, I am not, and it has had repercussions on my body. So I'm taking it easy this week, and it is all part of this learning lesson around how to better cope and deal with our emotions. So I hope that's been a starting point. If you find that you cannot do this on your own, absolutely find yourself a somatic practitioner, a somatic therapist, someone who works with body work. That's another term you might come across. They can help you, guide you through this process so that you aren't alone, because it is hard to do in the first place. And I had a lot of people and tools to help me in the beginning of my journey as well. I'm sending you so much love, and if you enjoyed this episode, I'd really appreciate if you left us a review. Any stars, ratings, subscriptions, follows, all of them help. And I'll be back next Tuesday with a brand new episode.